Vale, a ver, ahora damos un par de minutos. Okay, so I think since it's time to start, we can start. We start recording as well the seminar. So thank you very much and welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this new webinar of the Spanish Network on Safe and Sustainable Nanotechnologies. The Spanish Network on Safe and Sustainable Nanotechnologies is a network across Spain of 13 research centers dedicated to nanoscience and nanotechnology across the country, and we are dedicated to different activities, but having around three pillars. So the knowledge generation and sharing of nanoscience and nanotechnology research, the training activities, for example, organizing workshops for students and researchers in nanoscience and nanotechnology, and also organizing and participating in communication and dissemination activities, mainly about how nanotechnology and nanoscience can contribute to the development of a sustainable future. So today in this webinar, we are pleased to welcome Daniel García and Johanna Scheper from BioNanoNet. So Daniel and Johanna, the floor is yours. You may start now.
Yeah, very good afternoon to everyone. I believe we can do a brief introduction. Myself, I'm pharmacist by training, and basically I joined BioNanoNet, which is a non-profit research organization, which is dependent on a BioNanoNet association. The company is based in Graz, Austria, and basically my role there is like more in the regulatory field related with drugs and devices. Please, Johanna.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Johanna Scheper. I work together with Daniel in BNN in Austria. From my background is I am doctor in biochemistry and molecular biology, but it's true that from expertise, from my professional background, I wander from drug development, dealing with nanomaterials, to development of biosensors also with nanomaterials. And during the last 6 years, I have moved more towards also what we will talk about today, which is safe and sustainable by design. So with that, only to give you a slight idea about what we were talking about today, we will talk about a brief introduction to advanced materials and nanomedicines, as well as some related regulatory requirements. We will also talk about SSbD. We were not so sure about the audience, how used or what is your knowledge of SSbD. So we thought, okay, a little bit of introduction cannot be bad. So we will also talk about this a little bit, especially about the GRC SSbD framework and the last revision that has been published now in 2025. And of course, we will then speak about how to apply the SSbD in the nanomedical or in the pharma sector, taking into account also the regulatory aspects that you have to take into account, especially when it comes to the nanomedical field. And last but not least, very shortly, we will present you a little bit, give you a flavor about how BNN can support you on that if you think it is of interest for you. So with that, this is more or less the technical staff that we have behind. I mean, we have more people in the company, but the people that deals more or less with the things that related to SSbD, about regulation, and about all what is related to technology development are these 6 people here in the slides, in which you can see Daniel and me. And with that, I give the floor to Daniel again. Daniel, please.
Okay. So today's talk, it relates with sustainability, of course, and as the title explain, but more focus on pharma, no? And within pharma, we believe that because of the network, we believe that specifically we'll talk about nanomedicines. But we can extend these explanations to medicines in general, and the nanomedicines being like a specific case, no? So we following will do an introduction to start with regarding the advanced materials and the nanomedicines, also on the evolution of the nanomedical field, as well as the implications for human health and the impact on the environment. If you move to the next slide, please. So starting with the definition of advanced materials, and that is because advanced materials is nowadays the umbrella term or the general term within we can find nanomaterials, more specifically nanomedicines, no? And we go from the more general to the more specific, starting with the definition of advanced materials given by OECD back to 2023, which define advanced materials as materials that are rationally designed to have new enhanced properties and/or target or enhance structural features with the objective to achieve a specific of improved functional performance, no? And if we move to nanomaterials, of course, this is the definition of the nanomaterial that is given by the European Commission back to 2022. But the most important, having a look at the definition, is that the nanomaterial is defined by having particles at the nanoscale that provide a very high surface area, which is essential for its unique properties. If we look at the definition, definitely there is a clear mention of certain ranges in size, but it's also important to consider the surface area, because that's what makes the nanomaterials different, no? And of course, these definitions have changed, and even though we can find difference between regions, overall, I mean, this is clearly a state that on the definition that is used by IMA, that is definitely something about size, but there is also something about dimensions, no? So Emma described nanomedicines in a working definition and more practical terms, like a system designed for clinical application, but also considering one nanoscale dimension. The importance, and this is already just a brief intro on what they're going to discuss later, and it's related with the regulation applicable to medicines, also applicable to nanomedicines, that these nanomedicines is defined as other medicines, so need to meet the definition of a medicine as the directive 2001, and for which there is no specific legal basis, something I will explain later. But the first idea will be that a nanomedicine is a medicine. This is nothing special. The regulators consider when dealing with a nanomedicine, specifically in terms of legally speaking, okay? This is the specific elements that we can discuss later regarding the quality, the characterization, but not legally speaking, no? And of course, a nanosimilar in line with biosimilar or with a generic is like a nanomedicines that somehow is a copy of our original one, no? For which there is no specific basis as well. I mean, this nanosimilar need to show similar quality, safety, and efficacy as any generic or biosimilar that is authorized in Europe, no? If we move to the next slide, here we have evolution, no? This is the explanation, the evolution of the nanomedicine for the last 16 years. Just pointed out that first discovered regarding the liposome is back to 1964, whereas the first approved liposome containing a drug substance under the name called DocShield is approved in 1995. I mean, we can see that there is different technologies. Here is we look at nanocrystals and some other elements. And more specifically, and more recent, we look at this a COVID-19 vaccine based on mRNA encapsulated in a liposome. It was approved by 2021. No, and generally speaking, there is the idea behind the nanomedicines is strongly related with drug delivery, and also strong related with cancer drugs, and also among all, there is still a strong challenge that apply to the novel nanomedicines, starting with scale-ups and disease targeting. This is still a very problematic issues, not that research deal with that. If we move to the next slide, please. So, and then we try to emphasize why we like to talk about safe and sustainable nanomedicines, no? And this is because when we look at the way that regulators approve drugs, whether nanomedicines or not, they consider the benefits and the risks and the balance between the two, no? And of course, if we focus on the safety, regulators primarily focus on the safety when it's directly applied to the patients they are treating with these nanomedicines, whereas the safety beyond, so indirect exposition, is less considered, no? And of course, environmental, we'll later talk about environmental impact, which is nowadays a requirement. We can go in detail, but definitely is very focused on the active ingredient, is not touching on excipients, is not even touching on the process of synthesis or manufacturing, no? So we give some examples just to illustrate how the importance of this sustainable nanomedicines field will be in future, considering, for example, different compounds and the impact of the environment. For example, it's well documented the impact that the estrogen compounds like contraceptive pills and the hormone replacement therapy has in the fish production, as well as the behavior antidepressants that are released to the environment. And of course, there is always well documented the impact of diclofenac generally on the environment. I brought like an example, like the impact, apparently impact of loss of vulture populations, no, in Asia. And also, of course, the resistance derived to the release of antibiotics on the environment, no? But also, we have this indirect exposure. So a patient that has used a drug, and the drug always metabolized and eliminated and released to the environment, can be end up in other human being through indirect exposure by drinking water or even ingestion of crops grown in contaminated soils or even bathing, no? So the truth is that there is no long-term or even good chronic low-dose exposure assessment. This is completely unclear whether the release of these drugs has an impact on human health, no? And if we move to the next slide, we can find also a few examples of how the release of drugs to the environment has an impact on the environment. Starting with more concrete, the manufacturing of these drugs, the greenhouse gas emissions is considered around 5% of the worldwide emissions, direct or indirect emissions. Also of important, the large amount of waste because of the single use of some of those products on the health field, like gloves, syringes, and so on and so forth. And obviously, also the direct impact on the environmental pollution, no? Due to the emissions of greenhouse gases and so on. So if we move to the next slide. So now, I mean, before we move to the SSbD methodologies and all the framework and so on, we like to just to emphasize that the truth is that the sustainability is not being part, let's say, as a main focus on the industrial pharmaceutical industry, but we already identify, especially in the last few years, that the pharma industry is starting to be aware of the importance of the sustainability and the long-term environmental impact that the production at the release of drugs can have on the environment. And we identify great projects around, especially on the research and development. But that's true that just to point out, there's few examples that point out that even though there is even the possibility to redesign APIs for reducing the impact of the environment, there is certain activity that can be considered very difficult. No, just keep in mind that redesigning active ingredients for minimizing the future environmental impact can constitute a great financial impact to the pharmaceutical regulator, the pharmaceutical industry, no? Because they may involve the repetition of almost of the whole drug development process, no? So just to say that, of course, there is some of the SSbD principles Johanna will later explain that are already incorporated on the manufacturing process, but there is still a lot of things to do, no, on that side. If we move to the next slide, I think that is for you already, Johanna.
Yeah. So, okay, with this nice introduction about nanomaterials, advanced materials applied to pharma and problems that are related to environmental impact and also on the health safety issues, we will now move to let's talk about a little bit about SSbD, in which I will really very briefly introduce you a background about SSbD and also a little bit about the policy evolution that in the policy context, the evolution that the SSbD concept has had, as well as the presentation of the last GRC SSbD framework and the last adoptions that have been happened last year. So it will be really kept very briefly, first of all, because we were not so aware about, I assume that most of you know about SSbD, but only to make a little bit the baseline for everyone, just in case there is someone that not, we think that this brief introduction can be helpful for everyone. So when talking about SSbD, we see that in fact, SSbD is per se safe and sustainable by design. Maybe we think it is a really very new concept, but it's as a concept itself, maybe yes, but not about the building blocks that are behind of this. Because if we have a look on what has happened since the late 60s, we see that most of the things that are within the SSbD concept have been already developed years ago. Beginning in the late 60s, we had for the first time the establishment of what was a life cycle assessment, LCAs, that we will need to perform and to implement the SSbD framework. But also in the late 60s and around the 70s, for the first time, it came out the directive about the dangerous substances in the EU legislation when dealing with safety of chemicals, as well as also it was the first time that the term of sustainability was like sort of put in place as we know it nowadays in the Club of Rome report, in which somehow there was a report speaking or talking about the planet boundaries and the limit of growth that we have within this planet. It is curious to see that 20 years needs to pass until we arrive to the late 80s, around the 90s, in which in the Brundtland report, we had for the first time again, a little bit more of an evolution about this definition of sustainability. And also around the late 90s, several principles became or arose in the chemical sector, which was, first of all, the green chemistry principles that were then evolved to something that was the green engineering principles, and last but not least, arriving to what is sustainable chemistry principles. All these, especially these three things, are the ones that were kept in mind when in around 2015, the UN released their Sustainable Development Goals and the actions that need to be taken into account if we want to achieve them. And also, in the same moment, in around the 20s, after the NanoRect 2 project, together with the OECD, in the field of the nanomaterials, it became defined what is the safe by design concept. And I tell you that because when the Commission decided, or the GRC, the Joint Research Commission, the Joint Research Center from the Commission, developed the framework of SSbD, they mirrored in what was already defined and already done years ago in the safe by design, let's say, landscape. So at the end, SSbD is nothing more than an holistic approach that integrates safety, circularity, and functionality of chemicals, materials, products, or processes throughout the entire life cycle so that we can minimize the environmental impact of them. If we have now really a closer look on exactly the SSbD framework developed by the GRC and the evolution and the political or policy context in which it was defined or created, we have also to take into account that around the 20s, in which the time that I stopped just before, also the Commission was releasing for the first time the Green Deal, focusing on climate neutrality, on zero pollution and circular economy. But also on the chemistry side, it came out the chemical strategy for sustainability that was in fact based on these three things that I have told you: green chemistry, green engineering chemistry, and then green sustainable chemistry. All this is the base to then make this chemical strategy for sustainability. And 1 or 2 years later, it came out also the action plan defining exactly how we have, or what do we have to do in order that we can put in place this chemical strategy. And this action plan already mentioned and was pushing towards what after that would become the SSbD approach. So at this point, we arrived to 2022, in which the GRC releases the same year two reports. The first one is a little bit a first version that then was expanded towards the end of the year. But this is the GRC framework as we know it nowadays, or until last 2025. But more importantly is that it came out. People working in that field were already aware that they were trying to give feedback about it was working or not. But most importantly, I think from the industrial perspective is that by the end of 2022, the EU recommendation came in place also, setting on providing the importance of this framework to be considered for the development of new advanced materials, nanomaterials, chemicals, or products. Afterwards, what the GRC did was to try to make an effort of trying to implement what they had created using 3 demo cases or 3 use cases, focusing on chemical substances that are of high concern, which were surfactants, plasticizers, and flame retardants. And they realized already there, together with the whole stakeholder community which is behind working in SSbD, and this I am talking about big industry, but also policy regulators, but also academia and SMEs, that to implement such an approach completely is really very tricky. You need a lot of expertises, different expertises. It's not that easy, and there were still at that moment lots of gaps and challenges that need to be addressed, especially for SMEs, in which when we talk about the EAR framework, we will see later, it should be a tool that should boost innovation. And if we take into account that the main drivers for innovations are SMEs, in the case of the GRC, for an SME to implement it, it is really tricky. So there was still a lot of work to do to see how to accommodate that so that an SME can implement that in a, let's say, easy way, or at least with their resources. With that attempt in 2024, with all the feedback we gained from the stakeholders, the GRC released also a methodological guidance that was the first attempt to a little bit put a little bit on a light about how to implement or how you have to think about the framework when you try to implement it. And now, at the end of 2025, with all the inputs gathered since 2022 and with the use cases and with methodological guidelines, with a lot of stakeholder meetings that have happened in Brussels to speak about that, finally in 2025, a revised framework has been released, which has not changed in its core, but it has changed a little bit of things and refined and addressed some of the gaps or challenges that were detected in the first framework. So the definition by itself of safe and sustainable by design has not changed. And safe and sustainable by design is a pre-market approach for chemicals and materials design. It focuses on avoiding volumes and chemical or material properties that may be harmful for human health or environment, especially for all those groups that are ecotoxic, persistent, bioaccumulative, or mobile. And of course, it also wants to ensure the overall sustainability in relation to climate change, resource use, and protecting ecosystems and biodiversity along the whole life cycle of a product, or taking into account life cycle perspective. It's important to say this has also not changed, that it is a voluntary approach, it is an iterative approach. It requires the innovation process to be evaluated periodically, and it needs that, and as soon as you can apply it in the innovation process, the better. At that time, in the version of 2022, the way they see it, the process itself was defined in 5 steps, which are here in this picture on the right, which was dealing the 3 first steps were based on safety, on the safety dimension, dealing first of all with the intrinsic hazard that a chemical material can have, then going towards the safety dimension, meaning occupational hazard or during the production process, and then also, of course, the safety dimension when speaking in the use phase of the product or material or the chemical that you have developed. And last but not least, you had the step 5, which is dealing with the sustainability assessment through the whole life cycle, meaning performing the LCA and other methodologies in order to assess the sustainability of what you are developing. And there was a step 5, which was sort of voluntary also, and because there is still a lot of methodology that needs to be developed here when speaking about social and economic dimension. So if we move to what has more or less adapted or worked out since the version of 2022, now there are several SSbD principles that more or less are also in the previous framework, but they have grouped the design principles so that we have now these SSbD principles is that you have to assess considering the entire SSbD system, that you have to have a multidisciplinary engagement of all the actors along the entire life cycle and company experts. This was not something so highlighted in the first version of the framework, that you have to, of course, address safety and sustainability aspects throughout the innovation in an iterative approach. And here comes the major, I think, change, because although already in the first framework, it was said that it had to be an iterative approach and aligned to the innovation process, it was really hard at that time to understand how you could do that, because how it was defined, it was much more a linear path, rather than be something that you can do in an iterative way. So this is something that definitely in the second framework or in this revised framework, this has changed. And also something that has been put much more effort here is the transparency and the traceability of how you implement SSbD. Why? Because we will see afterwards in next slides that you have to be transparent regarding how you have implemented the SSbD and in which phase. So to be sure that the judge to be able to know the SSbD completeness that you have done, because this will ensure your traceability of the tiered safety and sustainability assessment that you have done, which was not that defined or really clear in the first framework. So I showed you in the previous slide, this structure about these 5 steps. So this is what mainly has changed in this second this second version of the framework. Now, the framework explains you that you have to deal with all the steps at the same time in different tiers of development of the technology, material, chemical that you are developing. Meaning what? That if you have to align into a typical standard innovation process funnel, you will begin with something which is really very low and in maturity of innovation. And in the meantime that you go through the funnel and you evolve in the stages of development, you arrive and you go closer to the market, you will have a more mature development. So in all these steps at the same time, you have to begin to assess the SSbD or to make your assessment about SSbD, meaning that this obligates you to, first of all, have your intended use or innovation to see if it's a design from scratch or if it is a redesign of a product of a chemical or material that you already have, which is also an option that you want to improve the performance or you want to improve that it is not so toxic, whatsoever you want to do. And you have to make analysis and a scope analysis so that you can set scenario. And this means that you have to see, okay, which are the actors, which are of the life cycle of that chemical material product that you want to develop. You need to know the data that you have available or not, meaning that at early stages, you most surely will not have data. So all the assessments that you are doing are providing you also qualitative data, more or less. And as long as you go through the funnel and you go towards having a more mature technology, material or chemical, you will have availability also of data that you will have been providing. So you go towards something that is more semi-quantitative. So you have maybe some things that still are qualitative in the results speaking line, but you will have already some quantitative data. And towards you, as much as you go to the market or that to a complete mature technology, you will have a complete or quantitative SSbD approach. So in either case, once you have set the SSbD scenario in which you want to make the assessment of safety and sustainability, you of course need to make then the safety and sustainability assessment. And going back again at early stages in design, as you don't have you don't have still the material, the chemical that you have developed, but you want to develop it, you have to rely as much as possible in silico or in modeling tools, which is something that is really now a trending topic in the nanomaterial, nanotechnology, or advanced material sectors, because there lots of tools have been developed during the last years and are under development in order that you can do some of these assessments to see, for example, in the in-design phase already, the chances that or the probability that you have that what you want to design will be toxic when coming into contact with other molecules or with other environments. So there are lots of different tools that you can use in the in-design phase. And as much as you go again through the funnel and you develop the technology or the material, you will see that you will have a physical-chemical characterization data, you will have maybe in vitro characterization data. So, and all these will provide you every time a little bit more of information, so to be sure that you are going in the right direction. Because if you have a red flag, you will say, okay, here I have to stop because there is something that is already telling me I am out of some scope that I have put what is acceptable in terms of safety or sustainability. And this depends again about the sector or the product that you want to develop. So at the end, you make in each round of iteration, you make also an SSbD evaluation of your results. And this feeds together with the documentation that you create, going back to this traceability that we were talking about, of this principle, all these feeds again in the next step in which you, again, in a more major level, need again to make a SSbD scenario scoping and to say, okay, now I am here, now maybe this and this has changed, this I have to think it in another way, or, and like this, doing it around the funnel until you arrive to the end. And so the main difference from the previous framework is that now we have understand that we have to do everything, not only the safety dimension at the beginning and then the sustainability a little bit later, which was more or less the case until 2023, 2024, people thought that. Now it's really take advantage of all what exists out there so that you can implement all the 5 steps from the very beginning and in the different tiers of maturity of the technology or material or chemical that you are developing. So when we take now this and we apply it to the nanopharmaceutical sector, I think this also can apply to any other sector. I mean, when you want to implement SSbD into a specific sector or the development of a product of that specific sector, you of course need to know, first of all, the R&D&I process of that specific sector. You need to know the SSbD framework. You have to sit down, you have to read it, you have to understand what is behind, what you need to consider. And of course, but there are 2 things that you need to know for sure: the life cycle of your material chemical product that you are developing. And here it is when it comes to changes between sectors. And in the case of the nanopharmaceutical world, or in fact in pharma, also if we would be speaking about a chemical for pharma industry, the most important things, because they are completely different when speaking about other sectors, is that you know the R&D&I process of nanomedicines or pharma, it doesn't matter, and the life cycle of pharma. This is really key, because if you don't understand that, it's impossible how you can then think about which are the stages in which and how you can improve or take into account the challenges that you will find in the way when going through the funnel of innovation of such a product. So if in the field of nanomedicine, and this scheme is really, it can be brought down only for let's say, advanced materials or nanomaterials applied to become a nanomedicine or a medicine, not so much to the standard pharma process, because pharma works, the traditional pharma that we know from big pharma is a little bit different, the clinical translation, because it is done from scratch normally in the same pharma industry. This doesn't happen when we are dealing with advanced materials and nanomaterials included to become a nanomedicine, for example, because who deals with that is normally, first of all, the SMEs, and the big pharma only enters at the later stages. So what happens? So what do we have to have into account when speaking about that? So we have our research concept that goes normally from TRL 1 to TRL 3. All that is done normally in research, in academia. And then once we arrive to TRL 4, which normally is the beginning of doing the preclinical validation and characterization of your new nanomedicine, you need also, you find a moment in which you also need, because you come from the lab, and you need to enter into the preclinical characterization and validation, you need to enter into animals. So automatically, you need more quantity of product. And this obligates you, and this doesn't happen in other sectors, this obligates you to in a very immature stage, to have already the capacity to produce more product. So you have to scale your process of production from the lab to something a little bit higher. And the problem is that in the case of nanomaterials and advanced materials, it happens a lot of times, if not always, that when you scale up the process of synthesis, some parameters changes. And this you have to have it really very under control, because if you don't have that under control, and if you don't have all the methodology in place to also be sure that the quality attributes of your nanomedicine and nanomaterial is not changing, you can then not go farther. So this is the first bottleneck that we find in the nanomedical field, or anyone that is dealing with advanced materials or nanomaterials for medicine. And then this is something that normally, also because of the funding schemes that are in the commission and so on, and also because of the private investors maybe that can help you on that, because this is really budget consuming. this is something that normally it's not anymore done in the academia, but more in SMEs or startups or spin-offs that has been specifically created to bridge that gap, okay? In the best of the cases, you can move from tier 4 to tier 7. It would mean that you have achieved to have all your preclinical characterization in place, you have all your pilot lines for production in place, you have been able to make your pilot plan so that you have it also ready to be certified under GMP, which is also a very important factor, which is not that easy, and it's super budget and time consuming, in which you then are able to enter into clinical phase 1 and phase 2. But this means that you will have dealt already with the EMA, and regarding this, Daniel will tell you some things now in some slides after me, which are key to take into account when you design a new nanomedicine. And so in the best case, if you arrive to clinical phase 2, it means that you have decreased already, or not decreased, you have de-risked a lot the uncertainty to arrive to the market, because all what I have explained until now is really the most, what I have put here, this translation to clinics is the most important and most challenging thing. All what is before that and all what comes after is relatively easy, because it comes in terms of research, or it's related to investment capacity. And that's the reason why normally when a SME arrives to this clinical phase 2A, normally it's then when they find the interest coming from big investors, big companies, because they see, okay, I have the risk technology, there is something out that is interesting for my commercial lines, and I have the money now to either buy this company or make a joint venture or whatever. I include that in my business lines. I put the investment to make the last clinical phase 3, and of course the registration, and then I go to the market, because I have, as a big pharma, I have already a market there, okay? So, but the most challenging thing on all this is this translation to clinics. And here there are several gaps and several bridges that needs to be jumped in order that you arrive to the end. And it's still, the theory is very nice, but it's still not so clear that the people gets that. This is exactly the same, but here it's only highlighted the timelines that you need of years to accomplish that. So it's not that important. Now, when we go, now we know that, and we go back to the framework itself, and this second version of the framework. What we want to accomplish is to have a performance enhancement in terms of safety and sustainability of our new nanomedicines that we are doing. So we want to have environmental aspects, we want to have more circularity, we have to have taken into account the social aspects, and we want to have the economics aspect also under control. And I am not mentioning the safety aspects, that of course are also important, but because in the health sector, the safety, as Daniel already told you, are of utmost importance for the EMA. So for sure, you will have them under control. But the others, which are not so important until now in the pharma industry, if you apply the SSbD framework, is because you want also to align to this performance enhancement in these other aspects. So you take from the very beginning this wheel that I have talked about before, that you apply the 5 steps from the very beginning, you scope the scenarios, you make the SSbD, the safety and sustainability assessments in each phase, depending on the data available, in silico, more with data, then in tests, then in vitro, then in vivo. But here, there is one key message or 2 key messages that are really important in the health sector. If we have a look on a very basic illustration of a life cycle of a sector, this depends, every sector has different life cycles or have different challenges or barriers in different sectors. In the case of pharma, there is one which is really completely different of any other one. That is, that normally the user receives it once you arrive to the market. In the case of pharma, this doesn't happen, because the first time that pharma is delivered to its ultimate user, which is the patient, already happens in the clinical phases, in which you are not in the market, but you are already administering these type of things, because you are trying to validate if it is a good new treatment or not. So you already deal with the use of this. And again, in terms of safety, all what we do in the clinical trials is for that, to really be sure about the safety and toxicity benefit risk ratio that Daniel was talking about. But you already have the issues about the production processes, and you have already there the problem of the release to the environment, because the maximum of a medicine is that you get it. It doesn't matter through which way of treatment, oral or intravenous, whatever. But the maximum is that you receive the treatment and your body has to be able to release it again after quick time, because if not, it would be toxic for the body. And these are two things that in the development of new nanomedicines or medicines in general has to be taken into account. So from the very beginning, the patient, which is the user, we have it already in a phase which is prior to arrive to the market, at least a pool of patients, okay? So, and depending on where you are doing your SSbD, you can have at the beginning SSbD, simplified SSbD with more quality data. You can have intermediate SSbD with semi-quantitative data. And if you arrive to have the complete SSbD at the end, you have completely quantitative data, okay? So there are several challenges in the nanomedical field per se that still needs, people are working on it, but they are still there. Like in regulation, we have lack of unified definition and classification of nanomedicine or advanced materials. We have lack of regulations. The analytical methods are not standardized and are different for most of the nanomaterials. You have the possible environmental impact and so on. When dealing with the scale-up and manufacturing things, we have the... Daniel, you want to say something?
No, sorry.
Okay.
It's a mistake.
The transition from small laboratory to batch size to large industrial volumes, of what I just was talking before. You need to select the excipients required to produce these high amounts, which again, you enter really rapidly into surfactants again, and then maybe you are again in with substances which are not safe and not sustainable, and so on and so forth. Also, we have to deal with safety concerns that in case of nanomaterials, the foremost challenge is that they are very small size, but they have a large surface, so they have a large interaction surface with other components, and especially the advanced materials and nanomaterials change their behavior depending in contact with what they enter, so it makes it even more difficult. Of course, toxicity, we know already that nanoparticles has a tendency to accumulate in different organs depending on the nature of the nanoparticle, leading to organ-specific toxicity. We have these technical barriers that I was talking about: scale-up manufacturing, quality control, waste management, handling, regulation, and of course, the impact environmentally speaking. And before I go back, or that Daniel explains you a little bit more about the regulation behind, one thing is clear, is that the SSbD framework helps you for regulatory preparedness. And this is already something that has been highlighted in the European Industrial Competitiveness and the Competitiveness Compass, because it facilitates that a SME or a company can align or prepare himself for when applying this in the design phase on an early stages of the innovation to the regulation that they will need to comply with. And this doesn't happen only in pharma, it happens in any sector, but especially in pharma, I think it helps a little bit more than most of the people think to apply SSbD when creating new nanomedicines. And this is exactly, I think, something that Daniel will tell you now. Daniel, please.
Yeah, thank you, Johanna. So the next section is trying to explain and to get some context to you with regard to the nanomedicines regulatory obligations, and we would like to do this before we go into the regulators call environmental risk assessment applicable to nanomedicines, for you to understand. So if we move to the next slide, we will start giving you the regulatory framework, an overview of the regulatory framework applicable to the approval of medicines in Europe, but also, I mean, I mean, equivalent figures exist on the United States FDA, you know. So when we talk about medicines or nanomedicine, we are talking about medicinal products, for which you need to understand that every territory, and some territories has more, some other has less, what we call legal bases. So the legal bases are specific legal pathways you need to follow in order to obtain certain rights, which mean basically eventually to put your product on the market. Different legal bases exist because there is a variety of drugs. The point for you to understand is there is no specific legal basis applicable to nanomedicines. Nanomedicines understand to be medicines in general. So how the regulators will conclude whether your product is eligible for marketing approval, because they will consider benefits and risks and put them in a balance. Of course, the benefits should be more than the risks. The risks should be assumable. But we don't, when we focus on nanomedicines, we don't take the nanotechnology as such. So we include all the elements within this equation, benefit and risks. Of course, the nanomedicine has particularities regarding the quality matters. For example, we earlier talked about the scalability, but Johanna also mentioned all the characterization and specific things that need to be taken into consideration. Is why regulators always analyze case by case. So every medicine will be different. And of course, you need a very good and very multidisciplinary team for evaluating all this information. No? If we move to the next slide, we can, of course, you go back just one, Johanna. Was trying to say that what is specific on nanomedicines? When we refer to the dossier, I mean, the developers used to present to regulatory authorities, this is called the electronic common technical document, which is an ICH standard format. That's true that specific content, when we refer to nanomedicines, is included within the section of quality matters. Of course, there is some specific, very specific tests on the in vitro tests that are not applicable to nanomedicines. And for all these specificities will be translated to this format, that is the one presented to regulators. But of course, keep in mind that we are talking about medicines. Nanomedicines at the end are medicines. No? If we move to the next slide, we are trying to illustrate, of course, if we refer to nanomedicines in terms of regulatory pathways, so ways used by developers to reach the market. So in Europe, specifically in Europe, we have, let's say, the two main pathways. We have the central pathway, which goes through the European Medicine Agency, which is a specific pathway that it's a specific way designed for specific medicines. For example, we talk about medicines targeting cancer conditions. You need to go through the centralized procedure. But also, we have in certain cases for certain drugs, we have these national pathways. We should choose instead of going through the EMA European Medicine through a centralized procedure and obtain marketing authorization for the whole Europe. We may select a specific countries within Europe going through national procedures. Well, in the case of nanomedicines can use both. Of course, depending, because if the medicine is designed for a cancer condition, need to go through centralized. Alternative can go through national procedure. So there is also, in the case of nanomedicines, the possibility to choose the regulatory pathway. No? If we move to the next slide, so very briefly, just trying to give you a flavor of what are the legal bases, why they have been created, and just mainly for you to know that there is no specific legal basis for a nanomedicine. For example, there is a specific legal basis for a biosimilar in Europe, or for a generic drug, but not for a nanomedicines. No. So if we move to the next slide, well, this is basic to explain that this doesn't exist. No, yeah, of course, yes. Move to the next slide. So now we'll move to the a section in the presentation where we will give you a brief idea of what is an environmental risk assessment. As for today, this is an obligation for marketing authorization application, let's say for a sponsor trying to approve a drug in Europe, also in the United States, to assess the product in terms of environmental impact. That connects us with the sustainability. This is the element of the drug development and the obligations from regulatory side that is directly impacting on the environment, but with specificity. So if we go through the guideline, because there is like this original guideline came from 2006, but it's been recently updated. No, it has been expanding on the tests, number of tests, and the particulars you need to apply to the drug. So the idea is you need to present. You need to, by the time you do a marketing authorization application, an application for approving of drug or nanomedicines, you need to present a document where you assess the environmental risks of the drug, but with the particularity that only applies to the substance, so it doesn't apply to the excipients. And you need to do that every legal basis you follow. So it's completely independent of the legal basis. In the case of veterinary medicines, that's slightly different. So for humans, this environmental or the result of this environmental assessment will never stop you for going into the market, whereas for veterinary medicines, it can be different. So depending on the result of this environmental, it can stop veterinary medicines to go into the market. So what is all about? But this environmental need to assess the risks due to storage, disposal, physicochemical, ecotoxicological, and fate properties of the active substance, not referring to the synthesis of the manufacturer. This is missing on this environmental risk. It's not considered the process of obtaining the drug. It's just the drug itself. No. As I said, the outcome of this environmental assessment doesn't constitute a reason for refusal, but it will impact on the labeling because you may need to introduce risk mitigator measures as a result of this environmental assessment output. No? So the conception of course has certain limitations. For example, they pretty much focus on the parent compound, so they don't consider metabolites. So they assume when you take a drug and you eliminate the drug, 100% excreted intact, so without transforming the drug. So the calculations or the assessment is based on the assumption that you take certain drugs and you excrete the same quantity, no? Which is not the case, no? And importantly, there is no specific assessment for nanotechnology-based medicine products within this guideline. This is the reason, and it's been pointed out by several research in the past, that this environmental risk assessment guideline and the test and the OECD test that specifically mentioned for conducting certain ecotoxicology tests are not adapted to nanomedicines. This is an issue that is still ongoing. It came from many years already ago, and we will talk later on that. No, this is not applicable. These are for naturally occurring substance or for medical devices as for today. Okay, if we move to the next slide, we'll try. Let's do something simple because the ERA, once you go in detail, is super complex. But just for you to know, I mean, basically the key concepts behind this ERA, this environmental risk assessment for the active ingredient, contains two main elements: the risk assessment, which is the probability of the environmental effect of the drug, and the hazard assessment. These two run in parallel. The hazard, of course, is the intrinsic harmful properties regardless of the disposal of the drug. No, in the first case, we talk about parameter. It's called predicted environmental concentration, and there is also related with risk assessment ecotoxicology concepts behind and tests, no? And related with the hazard assessment, of course, Johanna, I believe you mentioned before, but there is this way of classify the drug as persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic, or very persistent, very bioaccumulative. So moving from concepts behind to the phases or the methodology behind the way to assess the environmental impact of the active ingredient, we have two phases. We have initial risk assessment is considered a screening, and a second risk assessment is considered a refinement. So the way that it works is we start assessing in a high level the potential environmental impact of the drug by considering very limited number of data of elements. If as a result of this screening, we identify a drug with a potential impact, we need to move to the refinement, which involves potentially in vivo, in vitro tests. So the way to do this is because, of course, they will like to prevent first regulators will like to prevent that you need to invest first a lot of money to conclude whether your product has an impact or not. So starting with the assessment only by the calculation of this predicted environmental concentration in one single compartment, which is the surface water, and based on the outcome, we'll explain later on, we'll decide whether we need to move to the second phase or not. The threshold is established by calculating this predicted environmental concentration in only this surface water compartment. The threshold is on 0.1 micrograms per liter. So if we conclude that the expected concentration of your product is over this 0.01 micrograms per liter, then you need to move to the in-depth assessment, which is the phase 2 and the refinement. The refinement has two tiers, starting with also with a less an in-depth assessment, and based on the outcome, of course, moving to a tier B, which is a more in-depth assessment, considering a lot of tests, and which is going to potentially cost a lot of money. So if we move to the next slide, this is the decision tree that appears on the guideline, when we can see just the screening phase. The screening phase, as we explained, we have a risk assessment on one side and a hazard assessment running in parallel. On the hazard assessment, we can go in detail later on, but we basically, through certain tests, we can conclude, especially solubility, whether the product can be considered bioaccumulative, persistent, and toxic, or very persistent and very bioaccumulative. On the risk assessment side, we will start assessing, as I mentioned before, this spec specifically on this compartment with this threshold, and based on that, we will decide. So we conclude here that phase 1 aims to perform a conservative initial environmental risk assessment using default values and basic data to identify potential risks of a pharmaceutical in the aquatic compartment only before progressing to the phase 2. If we move to the next slide, we can see what is around this spec calculation, no? Because the important thing is this: we have a screening, which is pretty much I populate the equations with default values. You see here, I can use maximum daily doses of the active substance, of my active substance. This is what I provide as a sponsor. And of course, the others are default values. And also restricted only restricted to this compartment, the surface water. No, when I move to the refinement, this change slightly because I can go more in detail with these default values. Instead of being purely default values, I can start trying to adapt or to adjust, for example, through the market penetration factor or the prevalence of the condition. I can be more precise on the calculations. Let's say first I go to a screening, which is default values and maximum daily doses of my substance. If that came as a not being above certain threshold, I stop my assessment. Otherwise, I continue to a more refinement. If I move to the next slide, I can see the second phase. This is the decision tree that is also on the guidelines. Again, you are on your right-hand side, you see the hazard assessment running in parallel. And on your left-hand side, you see the decision tree for the risk assessment, considering starting with some physicochemical properties that will determine certain values, and based on that, I will trigger the assessment of my active ingredient of certain parameters indicating environmental impact on certain compartments. If I move, for example, to the next slide, is much better explained. So, starting with tier A, I need to calculate physicochemical characteristics, fate, and ecotoxicity. This is indicated in section 4.2.1 of the guideline. So this is the started. From that information, I derived the PENEC, okay, which is also a parameter that indicating the quantity or the concentration of the drug that will exert harm on the environment. So, indicating also on the decision tree, there is compartments like a surface water, sediment, and wastewater compartment that always need to be assessed in this phase 2, whereas there is other compartments like soil, groundwater, and secondary poisoning that will need to be assessed based on trigger values. And of course, I apply compartment-specific assessment and risk refinement in these specific sections I mentioned on the guideline. No, so on the left-hand side on the slide, you can see that in this phase 2, this refinement is considered the ratio between the PEC and the PENEC. Yeah, and based on again of the threshold, I will need to continue to a tier B. So if the result of this ratio, when I calculate these two predicted values, the expected predicted value, so the expected concentration of my drug in the environment in the different ones per environmental compartment versus the concentration, the predicted concentration will exert harm, environmental harm, and the result is less than 1. There is no risk identified, so I will conclude my environmental risk assessment. Otherwise, I need to move to a tier B. If I move to the next slide, we explain the tier B. The tier B in phase 2 use refine compartment-specific data to confirm or adjust the initial risk assessment. It is conducted only if tier 1 indicates potential risks and involves additional and more detailed studies beyond tier A. Of course, the description, the detail, all is in the guideline. You would like to have a look, no? And if we move to the next slide, this is a very brief summary of what hazard assessments involve. If you remember, I say there is 2 assessments running in parallel, the risk and the hazard. This is related with intrinsic harmful properties, regardless of the exposure of the substance. And basically, initially it's based on calculation on the log K, which is the octanol water partition coefficient, because this indicates the solubility of the product and is quite related with the persistency and the accumulation, of course, no? So I have a threshold established, whether I go before or beyond or below the 4.1, I will need to continue, no? And a definitive assessment is based on outcomes on OECD studies. So basically, all these guidelines, all these the assessment, entire assessment, use OECD guidelines describing different studies for the evaluation. If we move to the next slide, and why we can connect sustainability, environmental sustainability, and nanotechnology, as I mentioned before, this is clearly a lack of adaptation of these OECD guidelines to nanomedicines or nanotechnology, because the point here is that these guidelines are conceived for small molecules, let's say. So there is the assumption in these guidelines that the more max you put, the more toxicity you create. Whereas we know with nanotechnology is all about surface. So we are not capturing, by applying these guidelines, we are not capturing the magnitude of the nanomedicine with regard to the surface. No, this has been recognized by OECD experts in several meetings. The first back to 2013 in Berlin, more recent in November in Vienna, and the conclusion is that some of the OECD guidelines mentioned in this environmental risk assessment from EMA are applicable to nanomedicines as long as it can be adapted, no? And within the adaptation, this is the complexity behind, no? And if we move to the next slide, please. Now, what we are trying to explain to you is just all this, since now it's been very theoretically, but on a day-to-day, we deal with these cases. And we have an example that we believe that this is very interesting, and it's called a Navihill project. Just moving to the next slide, please. It's a European funding project, which basically specific an agreement. You can see it's like a 4 years project that was intended to develop multifunctional antimicrobial non-substituted biomaterials to improve wound management. So there is a technology. We cannot be very open on that because it is still some IP issues behind, so we cannot release much information. But basically, there is a combination of technologies that's try to arrive to the conclusion whether certain technology that incorporates nanotechnology can be of value for treating wound healing, specifically to chronic wounds, which has a strong impact on the population, no? And the objectives of the project was to create a safer and more sustainable wound dressing. Of course, the state of development is at early stage. So there is a high intrinsic uncertainty on the novel materials and process we are currently evaluating, no? But the idea behind is trying to substitute silver-based products. If you go to the market, the silver is quite common stuff that relates with by the time you need to treat wounds, especially the one that get infected, no? So SSbD in Navihill, how it's been applied? Pues basically what we do is clear and hierarchical approach, aligning with the GRC framework, and for which we basically develop specific questionnaires. We obtain certain information for all the participants, the developers, and trying to translate that information that was very back at the beginning into our tools, no? Trying to conclude the maturity and whether these developers will understand the SSbD principles, and we apply this SBD principle. So basically, there is also here a comparison within the project with the standard of care. And if we move to the next slide, we can see how, for example, the results looks like, for example, as a result of the first step of the SSbD framework, which is the hazard assessment. So we basically conclude that there is high at that point, of course, because the project is still in progress. We'll need to reevaluate in the coming months the technology and prove whether the developers has incorporate or implement some of the recommendations we gave to them. But basically, at that point, we identify high uncertainty in internal hazard assessment, justify unexpected at this phase of development, which was a very early phase of development. However, there was a robust physicochemical characterization on most of the components of the technology, solid basis for hazard screening despite remaining data gaps. Human and environmental safety assessed through comparison with standard of care. As I explained, we also have done a comparative analysis, SSbD comparative analysis versus the most common dressings on the market, what we consider the standard of care. So you see like radar charts and comparison in terms of the different technology, in terms of uncertainty, and this is what we are currently doing with this project. If we move to the next slide, please. And here, basically, this is the result of the SSbD principles that are recognized within the ERC framework, and we translate basically what the different participants or the different developers declare through this specific questionnaires we design. No? So you can see that there is some of them has implemented the recommendations. Some other are not, and for which we need to work and try to investigate why and what are the barriers they encounter in doing so. This is pretty much all, I believe. If we move to the next slide, in terms of this specific SSbD case. No, now I pass the floor over to Johanna, and she will explain a little bit more of what we do.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel. So very briefly, because we are arriving to the end of the presentation, only for you to know who we are, maybe because we are still not in, although Daniel and me are based in Spain, the company is in Austria, so maybe you never have heard about us. BioNan, as I told you at the beginning, is a small company that provides end-to-end solutions for innovation-driven product development, combining science, technology, regulatory, and business-related know-how. And we do it by trying to apply and to support with these different areas that you can see on the right side, called Go Compliant, Go Sustainable, Go Smarter, Go to Market, and Go Beyond. The organization structure of BioNan behind is what is a little bit more complicated. As I mentioned at the beginning, BioNan is a company, but it is owned by an international association that somehow give us the directions what we can do and what we cannot do. But we take care about all the members of our association. We are nowadays around 72 international members, most of them all in Europe. And they are from different kind of categories. I mean, there are big industry, there is SMEs, there are startups, and there are research centers, and there are universities and clinical groups. So we are really and all of them from very different sectors, but all of them have a common features that makes them to be involved in BioNan or in the BioNanoNet Association, which is that all of them deals with the development of nanomaterials or advanced materials applicable in different sectors and for different types of technologies. So our work, we have commission work towards the association that we have to do for them, but we also have our own roles, scientific roles, like the one that just was mentioned, for example, by Daniel in the NaviHeat project, by participating in European projects where we mainly can support you on SSbD and scientific communication, or in innovation and more business-related matters related to exploitation things. And but we also have our own external customers in which we also provide regulatory services also in projects, but maybe the part of regulatory is one of our most important ones to go to external services, not through a European project, because this is something that the companies, and especially small companies, needs in order to go further in the development of their products. So, but how can BioNan how BioNan contribute actually to the advanced materials landscape? So we try to foster networking by connecting all types of stakeholders across the different sectors and areas. So we can connect you maybe when you have a doubt and you think, I need some partner for this or that or that. We have a big connection behind of network, so we can connect people from every type of category of stakeholder together. We try to bridge the gap between scientific discovery, application, and market access with our innovation activities. We also try to facilitate the communication and knowledge exchange among all types of stakeholders by doing or acting as an interface of scientific communication. And of course, we love to drive sustainability and safety, and we support on the integration of safety, quality, and sustainability at the very initial phase of the development of new materials or advanced materials. And of course, our core expertise to be contributing to all this landscape is because our core expertise comes from the advanced material and nanomaterials, nanotechnology sector. That at the beginning was really, if we analyze it 10 years ago, we were really focused only in the health sector, nanomedicine, and biotechs. And this, in the last 10 years, has evolved a little bit, and we are now really involved in lots of other type of sectors, because at the end, you know it better than me, advanced materials, you can develop an advanced material that can be then applicable to different sectors. So this is something that has led us naturally to become also involved in other sectors. As said, our services are these here, in which we target in the co-compliant service, we can target resilience and regulatory readiness, not only for the health sector, but also in the chemical space. In the Go Sustainable, we try to support our customers or projects in developing safe, sustainable, innovative materials, processes, and products. Go Smarter is where we are able to make dedicated trainings in any of our expertises. There are people that are interested that we provide them trainings in regulatory issues, in SSbD, in whatever we do in business-related matters. In Go to Market, we try to support our customers to turn ideas or the research or the things that they have to arrive on the market by we support in doing business plans and business models for new creation of startups and spin-offs, or to try to find the right partnership that you need when you are a small company so that you can push forward, or to try to find an investor, these business-related things, more or less. And in Go Beyond, that's maybe our most ancient and most, let's say, core thing that we do, which is connecting people, because we were born from an association of a network. So we have our network behind, we have other people, or another network parallel to that, which is not members directly of BioNanoNet, but who we have collaborated all these years. So we know a lot of people. And maybe when speaking about safe and sustainable by design, or safety, sustainability, advanced materials, and especially today, because we were mentioning or focusing on the nanomedical field, we have this network also because we have 4 different platforms in which we are the coordinators. We have the Euronanotox platform. We are the coordinators of SOSCHEM Austria. I mean, SOSCHEM, you know, it's a national technology platform that exists also in Spain, or in France, in Germany. Every country has itself. And in Austria, we are the coordinators. It's from sustainable chemistry. We are also coordinators of Nanomedicine Austria, which is the national technology platform for nanomedicine. We have a really very good connection to the European technology platform also, and the Advanced Microfluidics Initiative. And when it comes to things that are external to us, but where we have been co-founders, we have been co-founders from IRIS, which is the International Community Network for SSbD. So we have created this network together, of course, with our partners in Europe, but we are a co-founder of that. So we have there really a big network behind if you are looking for some expertise. We are co-founders also from the Phoenix Open Innovation Testbed that has come out from an ancient or from a prior European project of an open innovation testbed that deals with nanomedicines. And we are also a coordination team of the Network for Safety and Sustainability of Chemicals and Materials, or former name was Nano Safety Cluster. So maybe people knows it much more by Nano Safety Cluster, but it has recently changed the name, and it is old. And we are also in the coordination team. And with that, I only remains to see if there are questions. And in the meantime, if you want to know something more about us, happily, we will be super happy if you ask us things or you contact us. You can, of course, visit the website. There is a lot of more information, detailed information about what we are, in which projects we are involved. And if you want to see a little bit more what our people do in our association or project that we are running and results that are coming out, you can subscribe through this QR code to our digital magazine that is released once every 3 months. And that has really nice content for free. I mean, you don't need to pay for it, but it sometimes gives you an idea about people that you maybe don't know in Europe that can be helpful for you. And with that, with the 5 minutes that are still left, if there is any question, we will be happy to answer them.
Yes, thank you very much, Johanna and Daniel. If there's any questions from the audience, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I can start with a question. I think, well, first of all, many thanks for this very, very complete explanation that you've given us about SSbD and also the environmental risk assessment, and also I think it has been very illustrative, the case study that you showed us, because this field can be difficult to apply from the academical research point of view. So I think you gave us a very, very complete contextualization and explanation of this theme. So I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the importance, of course, of adapting an SSbD approach from the very basic research to the clinical translation, and also very, very important to bridge this gap of the clinical translation. But sometimes I feel that academics or researchers in academia, in a very fundamental stage, they may think that adopting this approach from the very, very beginning may limit somehow the innovation of their research, the innovation side of their research, and they may prefer to just perform research without considering this approach, which involves as well these loops and loops, and also it involves to know very much the life cycle of the material you are developing, to keep analyzing all this life cycle. So how would you measure the cost of not taking this approach into account from the very beginning? I guess in the medical field it is easier to answer this question, but in the advanced materials field, for any other application that may not be, for example, the medical field, what would be your opinion on that matter?
I mean, it's, as I said, yes. If we a little bit of contextualization of the question that you just did. I mean, if we are talking about the risk or another risk, the cost of implementing the SSbD at early stages, it doesn't matter in any sector. I mean, as soon as you do it, as easier it will be that you don't enter into some things that then will become a problem in terms of toxicity or sustainability or safety. The problem here is that when we speak about advanced materials for any kind of sector, and you only develop them and you say, okay, I will see, well, I will adapt it. It can happen that, yes, that you are lucky enough to put it in the first application and see, here with this type of intended use, I have this problem with toxicology or sustainability or safety. But if I put it here, as the intended use is different, maybe this disappears or is in an acceptable range. So maybe you could think, I don't want to do that. When speaking about in the health sector, you have to be careful, because as long as you stay in the research level, TRL low, you can do whatever you want. But in the moment that you enter into the preclinical validation and into really late preclinical validation, you cannot change anymore the things, because you have to present exactly the process of production, the characteristics of your product with what you want to do the clinical stages. So you cannot change that anymore. And if you don't do that correctly at the beginning, you risk that at the middle of the process, you have to begin again, because you cannot change everything and anything how you want. And this is the most particular thing in the case of health. So as sooner you have under control, because of the physicochemical characterization, your nanomaterial or your advanced material, in terms of knowing the behavior, in terms of knowing the behavior in other environments, that provides you the security to know that you can handle it, and the scalability and the quality control parameters that you put, that you said, maintains themselves through the scalability process, then you are on the safe side, because if not, you risk that all what you have done will not be worthy and that you have to begin again. And we have seen that several years ago with some projects in which at the beginning it was not so, like the people that work in this field were not so aware about this, because let's speaking frankly, nanomedicine borns from people from the material side that went into nanomaterial world, no? And they were developing new nanomaterials, and then suddenly they decided, we could use that for nanomedicine. But they had no idea about what is the life cycle of a nanomedicine, about which are the challenges in the nanomedical field, about this translational into clinics. And so some things that for them were like in other sectors are acceptable in terms of uncertainty are not acceptable in the medical field. So when we speak in the medical field, I think it makes only sense that you do it from the very beginning. That's, but this is my opinion. And of course, I mean, people can not or can do it differently, but I have seen too many projects or ideas failing because of not dealing with that at the beginning.
Yes, indeed. And it's important for us researchers in this level, low TRLs, to keep that in mind. Yes, thank you, Johanna, very much. I don't know, I guess there are not more questions. I think we can leave it here. Thank you very much again, Johanna and Daniel, and see you in the next webinar from the network. Thank you.
Thank you.